is Yanni, and this is the first ever Soul Rebel panel discussion, which I'm super excited as an extension of Soul Rebel podcast. And today's topic is going to be on anti-Blackness within the Latin community. So today I have with me three really beautiful guests, and I will let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hi guys, I'm Mingo, NYC on Instagram. I'm a visual artist, and I'm here to spend this beautiful time with these beautiful ladies.
And what do you identify as? What is your identity?
I identify as Afrolatinidad within my community, but I also identify as human, pretty much.
I love that. I'm Taja Ellis on Instagram. I am here to contribute my perspective as a Black identifying woman who's from Caribbean Latin space.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hi y'all, I'm Sarai. I'm a performance artist, and I'm just here to tell my story as a Black woman from Latin America.
Nice. All right, so we're gonna get started. But really quickly, I did want to get into like where your family is from. And I know it's like I know you guys like represent multiple countries or just one, so where your family's from.
Well, I was born here in America, but my family, like my father is from Cuba, and my mom is Puerto Rican. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, my whole family's from Belize, but my grandmother and like some family members sprinkled through are from Honduras.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Nice. My entire family is raised in the Dominican Republic, and I'm just living here in the U.S. Yeah.
Cool. So I wanted to start with, when did you guys come into your Black identity, and why is it important for you to identify as Afro-Latin if you choose to identify as Afro-Latin?
I always knew I was Black, which I find it really interesting when I hear other Afro-Latinx women talking about how it's been a recent journey for them, the discovery of their Blackness. But even if it wasn't explicit, I always knew I was Black because it was indexed almost every day in my household, in school, in very implicit ways, like, like you got the nose of so-and-so and your hair looks like something you scrape. Like it's very like, it's in your face.
Yeah.
Specifically in Dominican Republic. And it's in your face, particularly in your family, in your household. It's the closest people to you that perpetuate these negative images associated with Blackness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got the same thing. Like my family would be like, "Why you have your fro out? Like that's like a brillo, una escoba."
Brillo, sí.
Or like they'll call me morena a lot, or like la negra, like yo negrita ven aquí, like, and I'll be like, okay, and like what makes me any more different than you guys? You guys are Black too, like,
Yeah.
and it's like you just hear it and then you just start thinking like, is there something wrong with that? Like, is there something wrong with the fact that my hair naturally is different from, like, straight hair? Like, it's like you hear within your family first.
Yeah.
They, like, identify first within the family.
Yeah. For me, it was actually identified. I think you have it within my family, like, just implicit, like, little things, like, just, like, I don't know, why are you wearing your hair like that? Or, like, you need to, like, moisturize. Or something like that. But my experience growing up in Brooklyn, like, I had a very clear sense of, like, my identity and who I was growing up. So even within Belize, like, there is such a myriad of colors and shapes and sizes. And, like, specifically, like, where my family's from, like, it's, like, every sibling, it's, like, one dark, one light, one dark, one light, one dark, one light. So it's, like, that symmetry was, like, always there. But, I think once I started to go to school and get educated on the another side of Brooklyn and just having different exposures from my environment and just where I was at and having that sense of confidence within the home, but then that being completely disrupted when it was outside of the home and, meeting kids who were Black but had their own connotations of Blackness, or meeting kids who were white and never had very specific connotations of Blackness and what that is and what that meant. So for me, having experience that was outside of the house was really just like, whoa.
It was different.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. So how deep do you guys think, like, anti-Blackness is? within the Latin community? Like, how does it look in your families? Like, communities that you've been around, like, what does that look like?
When you ask that, it makes me think of this one time I was going to like one of my mom's cousins' houses here in America, and like she had a pool, and she was like, "Oh, don't bring them around. I don't want the morenos in my pool." And like that offended me so much, because I'm like, you're like my mom's cousin. Just because you're lighter than us doesn't necessarily mean that like, you know, we're any different from you, and we're not gonna dirty your pool just because our complexion. Like, and I felt so offended from that, because I was like, what makes us any more different than her mom? And like my dad was the one to speak out on it. He was like, you know, like there's racism within your own like community. Like there's racism within like your own family as well, because not everyone grew up embracing that part of them. Like they grew up with more European features, or like more like looking up to European like characteristics, and it's like very different within everybody. And like that shit, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's racism in Dominican Republic specifically. It's institutional. It's personal. It's everywhere. It's in the media. Like if you watch Dominican TV for a while, it's very probable that you're gonna witness blackface, or witness like a very clear ridiculization of black people. And I think obviously the history has allowed in great part for this, because we had genocide in the 30s. We had a dictator that Trujillo. He basically was like a piece of poop, but he killed thousands of Haitians just because they were Haitian, aka black. So it's always been a fight, and it's been everywhere. It's really permeated every facets of life.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah. So how deep is anti-blackness within the Latin community? So if you can speak from like Belize, like Honduras, like what do you think that looks like, or what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, that paradigm specifically, because Honduras was colonized by the Spanish and Belize was colonized by the English, it's two different spheres of colonized influence. So what you have essentially is people wanting to identify with the British system more, and people wanting to attain this British American white life. But then you also have within Honduras people who are wanting to speak Spanish instead of their native tongues, and paying more homage to like, oh yeah, like I'm actually light, like that's because I'm mixed, without the implications of their black identity whatsoever. So it's like they can evidently be black, but it's like, you know, and it's specifically within the tribe that my family is, Garifuna, we are Carib, West African, and Spanish, by way of the colonizer for the Spanish, and you know, slaves got brought here. So it's like that fusion it's intense, and you find people picking sides without the overall identity being present in there. Yeah, so it runs deep. It's very much there, but yeah.
So is like Afro-Latina or like Afro-Latinx identity, like, is it separate from blackness? Because oftentimes I've heard people, and even like from other panel discussions that I've watched on like Afro-Latin identity, like they'll talk about like this idea that, well, as at least just being in America, if they identify as like Afro-Latin, then like, well then black Americans, like, well then you're not really black because you're, you know what I mean? It's like, what is that relationship like? And are the two of them separate?
Can I? Do you want to start? I have isolated myself a little bit from the mainstream Afro-Latinx movement, because it seems like it's always been about separating yourself from blackness, ironically. And even though our histories are different, just as the histories of black people in Africa are different from the histories of black people in the United States are different, we still are fighting with the same Western hegemony, the same cis white racism. So, I mean, after all, we're not so different.
Yeah.
I think that It's really interesting because I talk about this so much, and just like the complications, I think, of language within a lot of these new identity discourses,
Right.
it becomes very isolating within its want for inclusion. But sometimes I think we have to think about what are we actually being included in, and is that what we really want and need? So I think the term in and of itself it's very, you know, it encapsulates the people who were isolated, who didn't fully have the Black American experience or the African experience, and they've had it within, you know, the Spanish Caribbean. So I think that the term itself is necessary, but I think what that has is sort of this, like you said, a dilution of Black identity and people wanting to be like, you know, just very overlooking, I think, of a pivotal part, honestly, the main part of who you are. You know, phonetically, the way you lived, you just have a different word for it.
Right.
Maybe a different context, but it's the same thing. You
Yeah,
know,
it
it comes
is.
from the same source. So I think a lot of the times, like, we're so focused on all the schisms and divides, and no, this is it, and this is how, and this is, you know, this individualism, and like a lot of these, you know, Western, hegemonic, heteronormative identities. You know, there we go, using all the jargon that is so prevalent right now. But yeah, no, I mean, I think sometimes that gets very overlooked in terms of like the source. And I was actually, I'm gonna divert a little bit,
No,
but
go ahead.
you know, I was having a conversation with a friend, actually a couple of different friends, in terms of like, do we actually go back to the motherland or stay here and just work with what we have since we've been here for so many generations? Or like, well, my case is different. I'm first generation, I was born here, but you know, people who've lived here for like a long time. And I understand that this is something that we built and been on, but the reality is like people are coming here for very skewed reasons and the reality that is presented to us, you know. And I think that there's nothing wrong with like going back to, you know, the motherland within proper intention and proper understanding and proper placement, you know, and not thinking like, oh my God, like, I'm going to help like everyone and like come with the same, like, you know, you come with the same colonizer mentality we got disrupted with, so don't come with that. But very much like there's nothing wrong, I think, with like some sense of homage, some sense of respect, you know, some sense of knowing where you come from and what that is and what that means.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, I feel like the media not recently, probably in the last few years since I got on the internet, it's like I've been realizing like there's a word for it now. Before there wasn't a word for it. Before I would look up to like J-Lo and Shakira, but then when I realized there's Celia Cruz in the world, and like recently Amara La Grande, La Negra, yeah, like I've seen her and I'm like, wow. After like she blew up, I was like, now everybody is considering themselves like Afrolatina, or like actually recognizing that there's Latin women who are Black within the community. Before it was just like, you put your shades on, you just cover your eyes, whatever. Now it's like people are recognizing that they have Blackness within them and like speaking out on it.
Can I actually make a little comment on that? Because I also see a lot of people that are not necessarily from Latin America saying that Black people from Latin America don't know they're Black, which I don't think, I mean, in my personal experience, everyone I saw around me who was Black knew very well they were Black. Whether they were proud of it, it's a different story. But with this term itself, it's I'm also seeing a lot of people that are not Black using it.
Yeah,
thinking,
please, I want you to talk about that because
it's
I've
very
seen that a lot
frustrating.
too.
It's very frustrating because this is the main problem with the term itself, is that somehow it's interpreted as something different than Black. It just means Black from Latin America.
Right.
It doesn't mean I'm light skinned. It doesn't mean I have like 2B type of hair. If your grandma is Black and you're not, I mean, you don't have to be Black. It doesn't mean you're Black. You can still, because families in the Caribbean, Spanish speaking Caribbean specifically, they're very interracial.
Yeah.
So you can possibly have a white brother and a Black brother.
Yeah.
And that white brother cannot claim
Blackness.
Blackness.
Because it has to do with your phenotype.
It has to do with
and
your
people
phenotype.
don't realize it, like, okay, like, yes, sure, like, race is a social construct, but, like, it's based off of one's phenotype. So I'm glad you brought that up, because then it made me think about, like, spaces that I've seen, especially, like, people that have a bit more affluence on social media, like, they have, like, a really huge following. they'll usually be, you know, like racially ambiguous, but still very much like white adjacent, but will then use like the Afro-Latin identity because, like you said, they'll have like a grandparent that's black, or they'll be like, oh, but my great-grandfather was a black man, and it's like, but
that's his
like
experience, not yours.
Not yours.
Yeah. That's kind of like
That's very true.
something that I never really understood is people who don't phenotypically, like it's not going to be your experience in this lifetime as a black person because you don't phenotypically look like a black person.
Yeah.
Right.
So they kind of wanted to bring me into like, are there any misconceptions about, and you kind of like, I feel like brought up some like misconceptions about being Afro-Latin.
Misconceptions about being Afro-Latin.
You could be black and speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
That is a
big
big one, yo.
It's huge.
Like, Spanish was my first language, and a lot of people don't realize that because, like, when I, like, if I go somewhere and there's, like, other Spanish people, and, like, I feel like I don't know why, when I was younger, I feel like no one knew I was Spanish, like, knew I spoke Spanish or knew I was Latin. Like, I always just felt like an outcast somehow. I was just like, what is wrong with everyone? Like, I speak Spanish too. Like, they'll be speaking Spanish in front of me, talking shit. Like, sorry. They'll be talking out their ass and not know that I could respond back to them in Spanish. And I knew everything they said, and I know how to curse them out. Or, like, say something back to them that's like, dime que tú dijiste? Like, what did you say? Like, what? Like, I'll talk back to you in Spanish. Like, I feel like something like that is something that, like, frustrated me when I was growing up because within the since I like grew up here in Queens, and like it wasn't until I grew up in a school that was primarily like black and like a few Spanish people, and like in school within itself, I felt like no one would recognize or like even speak out on like what their cultural background or what they did at home was. Like, felt like the Spanish kids, like, if they were Spanish, they knew, like, you knew they were Spanish because they looked Spanish. Like, Spanish and, like, light skin, long hair, you know.
The stereotypical.
Yeah, but, like, someone like me in school, they're like, you speak Spanish? Why are you in ESL? Like, you don't even look like you speak Spanish. Like, yeah, I'm in ESL. I speak Spanish. Like, that's all my parents speak at home. Like,
Right.
it was just weird. Like, what was the question again? Sorry.
No, it was literally just like, are there any misconceptions about being Afro-Latin?
Yeah, it's like,
I mean,
it's so weird growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, one of the biggest misconceptions is that you can be, like, you don't have to pick sides.
right.
And I feel like, you know, that's the thing. Like, it's a very interesting thing because now I think we're in a day and age where, like, everyone somehow wants to be marginalized in some way, you know? And even if there's no... That's why I think a lot of the reason why a lot of this discourse and the jargon is being driven is because now there's definitions and you can put a name to a face now. And now people are thinking like, oh, wow, me too. But the reality is like, it goes back to what you were saying before, like people who aren't necessarily like black presenting or phenotypically black, and, you know, just even across like your rights to do certain things and like your placement, you know? So yeah, I think that you can be anything and everything, but at some point there becomes a distinguishability that I feel like is upon the self to understand. But yeah, like when I was growing up, like even to this day, like Garifuna, I'm so happy you knew what that was, because like no one knows. And like there's this resurgence now of keeping like indigenous, like ancient culture and language alive. But the reality is, like, there's a lot of intentional cultural genocide happening that, you know, Spanish is the third biggest speaking language in the world besides Chinese and English.
Yeah.
Something like that. Maybe a statistic. But, yeah, no, so I think that the language is being kept alive without, like, certain cultural aspects that are more prominent in certain geographical locations that are being completely disrupted elsewhere. So I think just like remembering like you can be this, that, but also understanding like I identify, you know?
Right. For me, the biggest misconception is the way most Dominicans understand race, even though a Black Dominican grows up in a violent environment towards them because of the way they look, they still will think that the epitome of Blackness is being Haitian, which being Haitian is really an epitome, but it's not the only way. So going back to what you said, you don't have to pick sides. So I definitely can say that it would be difficult to publicly claim yourself as Black without people thinking, why, you have a relative from Haiti? Or people indexing like, what, you Haitian? That is a big misconception in Dominican Republic.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't think that like the way that you would, if you were to say that you were Black, they would just assume like, oh, you're not, then you don't mean Dominican Republic, you mean Haiti.
Exactly.
And then, but then thinking like, you guys are on the same
It's the
island.
same island.
You guys are in the same place.
It's the same island. We came on the same boat. It's basically the same ancestor. We just had, I think both territories had different, the difference comes from the difference in economics. One territory was sugar plantation, another territory was cattle plantation. So the relationship between slave and owner was different. And so our side, we mixed more, we appropriated more European elements of culture, but it's really the same family. We just have to learn from each other, because that's really the only way we're gonna learn, understand the history.
Yeah. So I also wanted to ask too, like, does healing provide an insight into your development of your identity, or has it provided any insight into development of your identity?
I feel like healing has developed a lot of insight on my identity, because like it took a while for me to just accept everything that's come to me, as far as like understanding things. Like it took like traveling, I really brought up a new light to who I am. When I visited Cuba, I realized like embrace it, embrace everything about me, embrace everything about the people in my family, the roots, the struggle that the people before me had to go through in order to get me to where I am now. Like a lot of people have been through a lot in many generations, for everyone. And like it's good to know that you're here for a reason, and like you got like, you know, it just gives you, it gave me insight on myself, like my growth, because a lot of people have to do a lot of things in order for me to get here. And then me going back to see who's who and what, who did what, and where did this person come from, and how did this happen, and what mingles with what, in order for me to be here right now, in order for my parents to even connect, for me to be in the situation in which I'm in now in this country. It's like, okay, I respect everything, and I accept everything that, you know, from the past, that I can now embrace here and teach the next generations to come. Like, let me put you guys on now, like, you know. Traveling really helped with that. Yeah. Hearing a lot of insight.
For me, it's been listening. Listening a lot. I'm naturally pretty like, oh, I know what I'm doing. But I think just listening to elders, and just like how, like you said, I cry a lot at how much sacrifice has been made for me to be alive, to be in this country, be exactly who I am. You know, I wouldn't be any other version of myself but this one. And so I think healing my relationship as, you know, a Black woman amongst Black women in my household, like, has been profound for me, because that whole light skin, dark skin paradigm, like America versus the Caribbean, Spanish versus English, like those are existent within one body a lot of the time, multiple bodies. It's, you know, generational trauma. It's a lot of that's being regurgitated to you, and you're having these cycles that you don't even understand. Like, this isn't even coming from me. So it's like, I think understanding yourself as an individual amongst everything, like you're everything that's been made clear, you know, and being proud and respecting that and owning that. So,
I do feel like I'm being presented with a lot of insight at the moment, and that's because of two different types of healing. the political engagement, which is basically what introduced me to being public about my Blackness. It's, you know, the way I wear my hair, you know, the things that I look forward to, the things that I consume, the circles in which I socialize. But recently, what I'm paying closer attention to at the moment is rest as political strategy, knowing that I don't have to respond to everything that's going on, because I know the toil that it causes on my mental health. And also to know that I'm not here to do white people's work. I'm not here to educate white people. I'm here to take care of myself first and foremost, as a Black person living in this world, and extending that care and that understanding to my Black circle.